Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 on Friday the 25th of August. My name is Brian Liddy and I'm joined this evening by William Duguid. William is a writer and activist currently with Perth and Kinross Yes Hub, and William, you're also a frequent contributor to Broadcasting Scotland, so thank you once again.
Yes, well, thank you for continuing to ask me back, and good to be here.
Yeah, I wonder maybe we're going to get our own show together at some point. I don't know. I'll pitch
Woohoo!
that to. So, as usual, we have the Ukraine update, day 548. An onboard explosion probably brought down the plane presumed to be carrying Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin, a preliminary US intelligence assessment concluded. US and Western officials said it determined that Prigozhin was very likely targeted and that the explosion falls in line with Putin's long history of trying to silence his critics. Several of Prigozhin's lieutenants were also presumed dead. Pentagon spokesperson Brig General Pat Ryder said he had no indication the plane was brought down by a surface-to-air missile. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Ukraine had nothing to do with the explosion. Germany's foreign minister said the presumed death of Yevgeny Prigozhin follows a pattern of unclarified fatalities in Russia. Moscow's Vnukovo and Domodedovo airports suspended flights early today following reports of explosions in the Russian regions of Tula and Kaluga overnight. Flights were also briefly disrupted on Tuesday and Wednesday during Ukrainian drone attacks. Ukrainian forces marked the country's Independence Day with a naval raid into occupied Crimea, and Zelensky praised Ukrainians for the defiance and courage that has won them global support in the fight with Russia. The national holiday celebrates Ukraine's independence from the former Soviet Union in 1991, but this year it also marks 18 months since Vladimir Putin's full-scale invasion plunged the country into a war for survival. The US will begin F-16 training for Ukrainian pilots in October. Following English language training for pilots in September, F-16 flying training is expected to begin in October at Morris Air National Guard Base in Tucson, Arizona. President Zelensky said he spoke with President Biden earlier today. Zelensky said he thanked Biden for his Ukraine Independence Day greetings and support in the conflict with Russia. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov told UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres that Russia will return to the Black Sea grain deal only if the West fulfills its obligations to Moscow. Russia has extended the detention of the Wall Street Journal correspondent Evan Gershkovich by 3 months. Again, forgive me for mispronunciations. Gershkovich was the first journalist arrested by Russian authorities on allegations of spying since the Cold War. An early morning missile strike injured 7 people in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro. The governor of the Dnipropetrovsk region, Serhiy Lysak, said on Thursday. Norwegian broadcaster TV2 has reported that Norway has decided to donate combat aircraft to Ukraine. So, William, I'm so sorry. I have this thing with names. I'm so sorry, William. Was there anything, I would imagine it's the first item on that update that's probably comes to mind?
Yeah, it's the one that's got the world agog, isn't it? We all thought that Prigozhin was going to have his comeuppance, and it perhaps happened rather sooner than we expected. Normally, of course, I think it's patently obvious that it's not an accident as such. I think a bomb on board is quite likely, and a good way to wipe out not just Prigozhin but all of his, or a fair number of his lieutenants as well. It's a bit of a change of style for Russia. Normally, it gets people onto high floors of buildings and pushes them out the window, but a bit of versatility never hurts, does it? So I think that basically puts a spike through Wagner's efforts for some time to come, which may not be a bad thing as far as Ukraine is concerned, because there's always the possibility that Belarus might try something under a false flag. But yeah, it's fascinating to hear if you like, the denials and the mealy-mouthed words about Prigozhin, when everybody suspects in the depths of their heart that absolutely this was him being done away with, along with many of his buddies.
Yes, and I suppose every day that passes when he doesn't stand up and say, "It's okay, I'm here, I'm still alive," then it just kind of cements that it probably is, that he probably is dead. But I think it's maybe also, is it worth mentioning, it just underlines, we know that Putin's already, oh, the word has just dropped out of my head, the fact that he's willing to bring down a plane where there were innocent civilians on in the air crew just shows how brutal he's willing to be. I
It's
suppose.
it's it's the way he operates. It's a war situation for him, and in many ways, everything is a war situation for him. And yeah, I don't think he feels remorse very easily. Just an impression. I've no way of actually knowing that, but it's an impression.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. So I'll move on to our next item. The energy price cap has fallen below £2,000 a year for the first time in 18 months, but consumer groups have warned that households will feel little relief from high energy costs this winter. 29 million UK households can expect to pay an average of £1,923 a year from October, after the energy regulator reduced the price cap from £2,074 in the previous quarter. The average household will still pay almost double the rate for their gas and electricity than before Russia's invasion of the Ukraine triggered a global energy crisis. Many will see little difference in what they pay because the £400 support from the government given to all homes last winter is no longer available, and standing charges have risen from an average of £186 a year in October 2021 to just over £300. The new rate will apply from October to December before it is adjusted again in January. The cap limits the unit price of energy, not the total amount customers pay. Those with above average energy use will receive higher bills. The UK Government Energy Security Secretary, Grant Shapps, said it's encouraging families will see their energy bills continue to fall from October, down £580 on average since their peak, another milestone as we deliver on our promise to halve inflation. Scottish Government Energy Secretary Neil Gray said, with average energy bills still nearly twice what they were 2 years ago, this small reduction will be of little comfort to the many thousands of households who continue to face significant hardship, particularly as we head into the winter months and people need a warm home most. He went on to say the Scottish Government is continuing to do everything we can within our limited powers to support as many people as possible. We trebled our fuel insecurity fund to £30 million this year, and the bulk of this is set to be distributed throughout autumn and winter, so that those who are most at risk of self-rationing or self-disconnecting get tangible help when they need it most. The SNP Energy spokesperson, Alan Brown MP, said, "These latest figures show that the UK government is happy to sit on its hands while households across Scotland continue to suffer. With a cold winter fast approaching, the UK government has a responsibility to set out exactly what its plans are to support families." So, William, just looking at my notes here, so the nights are drawing in, and the pay-as-you-go customers, I don't know if that was mentioned in the report, I can't remember, they're on a higher rate than people who pay their bills in any other ways. Is this just tinkering around the edges of the problem? Wouldn't a windfall tax on the massive profits that the energy companies are making be more effective? UK gas and electrical companies made excess profits of £170 billion in 2022. Can't that be redistributed?
Well, if the government had the UK government had any wish to redistribute it, then that would be a good idea, because it's very much a sticking plaster. By the way, just those prepayment customers, I think, were kind of referred to by Neil Gray when he talked about self-disconnecting, because very often self-disconnecting is prepayment folk that can't pay anymore. So yes, and they have a greater rate to pay than everybody else, which is absolutely iniquitous. It's just not looking at the problem as it really is. Um, these prices are going up again in January because the basic energy costs are going up. And that's just when the winter is really going to start to bite, between January and April. So there are hard times ahead. Government support has dropped. And with the standing charge going up, that's now 64% increase in standing charges in 2 years. And you're not going to tell me that the cost of distributing electricity to all corners of the United Kingdom has gone up by that much. That is just the energy companies having it both ways, if you like, and making sure the money rolls in. People are going to feel about the same just now, and they're going to feel worse when it gets to January. And I believe that last winter was fairly mild by some standards of late. If the coming winter isn't, that could be disastrous. What we need now is a social tariff, which is not really mentioned in the government rhetoric at all. We need a recalibration of the energy market so it's not all based costs on the most expensive means of production, which is at the moment via gas, and actually reflects the true cost of production, including, for example, renewables, which are considerably cheaper. And that would get rid of some of the profiteering. And we need support from governments plural, possibly, to ensure better insulation in housing, particularly old housing stock, where again, a lot of the people who are worse off tend to be living, the people who are paying more anyway, and they need more energy because their houses are cold, improperly insulated. We need a huge drive for insulation anyway with regard to climate change and all that's coming there. So we need to get on with that. And absolutely no sign from the UK government of that. Grant Shapps, and with his comments about people will be happy now, living in a fantasy world, I'm afraid. And the knock-on effects on the economy of people just not being able to pay their bills will continue to get worse, and we will be in a spiral. So, it's lovely to see the cap come down, but the energy companies have covered themselves and the government is doing nothing.
Thank you, William. And you took the words right out of my mouth, and you provided us with the perfect link to the next item when you talked about insulation, or the lack of it from the government. The Scottish Government has said that the journey to a greener, fairer net zero economy is accelerating as the Butte House Agreement, the shared policy programme between the Scottish Government and the Scottish Green Party, marks its second anniversary. In the past year, there has been an 8% growth in renewables capacity in Scotland, more than 1.5 times the rate of growth seen in the rest of the UK, and the Scottish Government has published its draft energy strategy and Just Transition Plan, setting out a route to secure Scotland's fastest possible, fair and just move away from fossil fuels. Analysis estimates that the number of low-carbon production jobs could rise from 19,000 in 2019 to 77,000 by 2050, meaning there will be more jobs in energy production in 2050 than there are now. The Scottish Government has also repeated an onshore wind policy statement, confirming an ambition to more than double the country's onshore wind capacity, while the new National Planning Framework 4 will help further realise Scotland's renewable energy potential. To mark the anniversary, Energy Secretary Neil Gray and Zero Carbon Buildings Minister Patrick Harvey officially opened the Green Gaires East Wind Farm in North Lanarkshire. Energy Secretary Neil Gray said, "Delivering on our climate obligations is an absolute priority for this government, as is our unwavering commitment to ensuring the journey to net zero is fair and just for everyone." He went on to say that the Butte House Agreement signalled our shared commitment to working together to build a greener, fairer and independent Scotland. An unstable world needs more cooperation and more constructive conversation if governments are to effectively meet the challenges they face. It is absolutely fitting, therefore, that we are making the second anniversary of the agreement here at the new Green Gaires East Wind Farm. Zero Carbon Buildings Minister Patrick Harvey said, "The Butte House Agreement established a shared policy programme that has tackling the climate emergency and supporting Scotland's renewable energy industries at its core, and it's great to see the impact that this is having." The Butte House Agreement is also a commitment to a constructive way of working based on shared aims and the core principles of building trust and good faith. Our approach to delivering a just and fair energy transition, ensuring we work across Parliament, with the sector and with communities, is a prime example of how this approach benefits Scotland. So William, the First Minister, when he first took his place as the First Minister, Hamza Yusuf, said that he thought the Butte House Agreement was worth its weight in gold. And Lorna Slater in the National has said that Westminster is terrified of the Butte House Agreement. She cites the Internal Market Act, the use of Section 35 to block gender reform in Scotland, and the torpedoing of the can and bottle recycling scheme just as it was ready to launch. Is she right? Do you think, is Westminster paying much attention to the Butte House Agreement, and if they are aware of it, are they terrified?
I'm sure they're not terrified, because Westminster will continue to think they've got this situation with Scotland under control. They can always issue Section 35s at any point. It's probably a slight irritant that the Greens are managing to stick together with the Scottish Government with a fairly flexible agreement that does allow disagreement on certain policies. So it's not just an arm up the back sort of thing. It is an actually fairly flexible agreement. There is obviously some disquiet, even within quarters of the SNP, such as Fergus Ewing and Joanna Cherry, and to a certain extent Kate Forbes, who wants a debate about it, within the SNP and indeed within the independence movement. But to be quite honest with you, I think what we need now, just to get things done in what's a fairly toxic parliament, much different from the parliament that we saw between 2007 and 2011, when the SNP under Alex Salmond was very able to negotiate the fact that they were really quite a small minority government and to make agreements as necessary to drive things forward. It's a very different parliament now, for the very simple reason that independence is on the cards as a possibility, and that is not something that the Unionists parties will ever put up with. And therefore, everything the Scottish Government does is under attack, and the Unionist parties will not support it. It takes quite an agreed upon measure to have any form of cross-party dealings. And therefore, having the Greens actually on board with the government just keeps the ship running. We might disagree with some of the things that happen. That's a debate that goes on within the independence movement. But it does provide the stability. And even if support for the SNP is slipping, John Curtis did a study that suggested that the Butte House Agreement, it might have been a slight contributor, but it wasn't the main contributor to it. The SNP may have other problems of its own. But generally speaking, the Butte House Agreement, 2 years old today, is just allowing government in Scotland to continue. And yeah, on the renewable side, it's actually coming up with some decent things. I honestly wish there were more money to invest in it. I wish that energy was devolved so that we could really do stuff. And I wish at the end of the day that we were independent so we had the funds to do things properly. But yep, good to see the 2 years, and keep it up, folks.
Thanks, William. Is it worth maybe highlighting the fact that it does seem to be this idea of a cooperation, two parties working together, putting aside their differences? It seems like that's quite a European way of politics and way of working, and maybe shows again that Scotland is different from the rest of the UK.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, it's the way the Parliament was designed. It may not have been designed so that we would have a European ideal in working together, because there is a school of thought that says it was designed that way to basically stuff the SNP. That went spectacularly wrong from 2007 on. But certainly, yeah, it's the way that works everywhere. Just look at your Borgen and see how very strange parties get on with each other, but they still manage to come up with decent stuff. And it gets you away from the polarisation that is such a feature of the Scottish Parliament otherwise, and that's the thing that we will benefit most from getting rid of upon independence, when actually parties get together to start looking after Scotland's interests again, rather than whatever view of the Constitution they've got.
Thank you, William. So MPs who lose their seats or stand down at the next UK general election will get bigger payouts for winding up their offices, with the sum doubling to £17,300, the UK Parliament Expenses Watchdog has announced. MPs will now be paid for 4 months after leaving office to enable them to wind up their casework and other duties, doubling from the current period of 8 weeks. The Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority, or IPSA, made the change after reviewing arrangements for payments following the next election. MPs who lose their seats also qualify for loss of office payments at twice the rate of statutory redundancy pay. The winding up payments are additional to this. They have to demonstrate that they are using their time to work on winding up their offices. MP staff can also qualify for such payments. Ministers get different severance payments for loss of office, with a cabinet minister receiving £16,876. The changes were announced by IPSA in July after a review prompted by the boundary changes and an end of the Fixed Term Parliaments Act in 2022. They informed MPs in a bulletin sent over the summer saying the winding up period has proven to be too short for winding up what can be complex office arrangements. IPSA has seen the issues for MP staff who have often been contacted after the winding up period to assist in finding receipts for business costs. Other changes include allowing loss of office payments for MPs who fail to be re-elected when standing in any seat, rather than the same seat, as some have had their constituencies abolished as part of the boundary changes. So, William, this change, am I being too cynical when I suggest that perhaps this change is because so many Tory MPs think they're going to probably lose their seat after the next general election? Or could there be something to that?
No, I think that's a wee bit on the cynical side, to be fair. I think this looks like it is pretty well to do with what was an independent review following the boundary changes, and the fact that there might be, as a result of the boundary changes, quite a few MPs who were displaced. It automatically happens. And it very specifically, the doubling, if you like, is a doubling of the period for which winding up money is available for the MPs' offices. And it is quite important, particularly if a lot of MPs are losing their seats for reasons above and beyond just not getting voted in, but their seat disappearing, etc., that casework is continued and comes to a satisfactory conclusion. And it seemed to be found that 8 weeks was just not enough to do that, and maybe 4 months is a wee bit more like it. Now, they do have to prove that they're using the money properly, but I think this actual change is probably a fairly wise move. The sort of the money that MPs get upon losing office, in general, yes, you can comment on, and yeah, we all have our views on that, but it's, I think, not actually changing here. So this is probably quite wise. Of course, many of the MPs who do lose their seats will be hot-footing it to the Lords for a £300 a day allowance, and that is something we can all complain about when that happens. Just wait for that one.
Yeah, that's a good point, William. And also, I don't really understand. You can probably tell when most of the questions that I've set here. Can't they just take a leaf out of Nadine Dorry's book and just not turn up, but continue to take their salary?
Oh my, Nadine Dorries is going to be a case study. Honestly, words fail me. Obviously, they fail her because she never turns up to utter any. Um, I think the only thing she's achieved in Parliament that I can see in and out of Parliament is to be part of the Boris Johnson fan club. I just yearn for the day when she's out of office, and I really, unlike many other MPs who find their way into reasonably good jobs after a while because they know how to tweak the system, so they become poachers rather than gamekeepers, if you like. I'm not sure who would want to employ Nadine Dorries, except maybe I'm a celebrity, keep me here forever, away from everybody else.
Yes, and I think it's incredible that the Prime Minister hasn't done anything about it. He seems to be quite content to let her to carry on doing that. But I'll move on to our next item. 39 asylum seekers. Excuse me. 39 asylum seekers who were briefly accommodated on the Home Office's controversial Bibby Stockholm barge in Dorset have said conditions on board were so bad that one was driven to attempted suicide. A 3-page letter sent to the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, also set out the asylum seekers' fear and despair at being trapped on the barge and appeals to her to help them in their search for safety and freedom in the UK. They described the barge as an unsafe, frightening and isolated place, but said that as law-abiding people, they were fearful of not obeying Home Office instructions. The asylum seekers described the barge as a place of exile and said the conditions were small rooms and a terrifying residence. Some of the asylum seekers are reported to be too traumatised to return to the barge in Portland. According to the letter, some people fell ill on the barge. The letter also says, in a tragic incident, one of the asylum seekers attempted suicide, but we acted promptly and prevented this unfortunate event. Considering the ongoing difficulties, it's not unexpected that we might face a repeat of such situations in the future. They said they were the last people to be informed about Legionella bacteria found on the barge and announced by the Home Office on the 11th of August. They also said their brief stay on the barge had led to a deterioration in their mental health. Currently, we are staying in an old and abandoned hotel. The sense of isolation and loneliness has taken over us, and psychological and emotional pressures have increased significantly. The letter to Braverman concludes with a plea to consider their situation as a priority. We are individuals who are tired of the challenges that have arisen and no longer have the strength to face them. One Iranian asylum seeker among the 39 has vowed never to return there. He said many of the other men who spent a few days on board felt the same way. He said, "If I had had to stay even one more day on the barge, I would have had suicidal thoughts. When I got on the barge, the smell and stench was overwhelming. Being on that barge will always be a horrific memory in my brain. It's a completely unfit place. We're all feeling very upset, but are even more upset that the Home Office want to return us to this horror show." So, William, these are law-abiding people, as they've described themselves, placed on a barge that they described as a terrifying residence. Do you think the letter will have any effect on Braverman? Will we see policy changes for the better as a result?
Almost certainly not. If Suella Braverman has exhibited anything, it's deaf ears, and I don't think it will have any effect. However, I am, you said law-abiding, I would add to that, highly articulate and great to hear asylum seekers, one, standing up for themselves, and two, demonstrating that they can stand up for themselves and make a case for themselves, and getting to hear their voice, because so often we don't. They are just numbers to us most of the time. And they're not. They're individual human beings. They're individual human beings who've been through terrible times and who continue to be through terrible times. And they're getting together and they're helping each other. And, you know, it's good to hear that in its own right. And it should be a lesson to some people that maybe regard them just as second-class citizens, that these are, in many cases, educated people who were successful in the countries that they were in, and have been put in an impossible situation, and in essence, no different from us. And that, if that does nothing else, that would be a good thing. I like some of the other things they said, such as, we came to the UK to escape persecution, but are facing more persecution here. And asking the question, would you put a member of your family in this place, the baby Stockholm that is, for one day? And we know what the answer to these things is. And it's scandalous that we're doing it to these people.
Yes, and we have to kind of move on, conscious of the time, but certainly I remember in previous reports from here in Broadcasting Scotland, it was highlighted that the government said if this barge was good enough for British oil workers, then it should be good enough for asylum seekers. But they didn't mention the fact that that barge, I think, was meant to hold 225 people, but the British government put in bunk beds so that they could double the number of people that stayed there, which again just shows their approach. But I'll move on to the next item. French Interior Minister Gerald Darmanin has said far-right leader Marine Le Pen could win the next presidential election in 2027. He said the fact of the matter is that in 5 years' time, a victory for Madame Le Pen is quite probable. Darmanin told La Voix du Nord in an interview published today. Darmanin is thought to be positioning himself as a potential centre-right candidate. He's also in charge of the French policing and has faced several crises in recent months, including urban unrest after the police shooting of a teenager of Algerian origin at a traffic stop outside Paris in June, and violent gun crime and drug dealer turf wars in Marseille and Nîmes. This Sunday, he is to hold a large political gathering over sausage, chips and beer in his northern base of Tourcoing, styled as a brainstorming exercise on ways to stop Le Pen and to win back working class and middle class workers. Political observers in Paris see it as a step towards a possible presidential bid. Le Pen, who was beaten by Emmanuel Macron in last year's presidential election, has presided over a historic success for her far-right National Rally party in Parliament, where it is the biggest single opposition party. She is expected to run for the fourth time for president in 2027, when the French constitution bars Macron from running for a third term. Darmanin told La Voix du Nord, "If we let a large part of the working class and middle class go over to Marine Le Pen, the professional classes will not support us in the second round." He suggested that societal issues, such as salaries, working life, the cost of living and support for families, were crucial. He said that is what could get Marine Le Pen elected in 2027, not questions on immigration. Darmanin is attempting to style himself as the favoured candidate of working families. From the north of France, his father was a bar owner and his mother, who was of Algerian origin, worked as a concierge and cleaner. He is close to Macron after quitting the right-wing Les Républicains, led by Nicolas Sarkozy, to join Macron in 2017. As a budget minister, Darmanin helped implement Macron's main tax changes. Feminists protested in the streets at his appointment as Interior Minister in 2020 after a woman had accused him of rape, sexual harassment and abuse of trust in a case that dated back to 2009. Darmanin denied all charges. A Paris Court of Appeal this year upheld judges' dismissal of the case. As Interior Minister, he has regularly been criticised by the left for his hardline stance on security. In 2013, he was against the legalisation of same-sex marriage in France, but said this year that he was wrong. So, William, maybe just a wee reminder, I don't know very much about French politics, but there's a reference there to the second round. So my understanding is that in a French election, there's lots of candidates from lots of parties, and they all, go for election. And then after that first election, the top two candidates then go head to head. And in the past two elections, both times it's been Marine Le Pen and Macron who have gone head-to-head twice, and both times Macron's won. I don't really have a question for you. I really just wanted to sort of find out what you think about the risk or the chance of Le Pen becoming the president.
I think Marine Le Pen has got a decent chance of becoming president in 2027. She's tried to present a slightly, I think, softer view of the far right, if you like, than perhaps her father showed. And her father, even under her watch, got chucked out of the party in 2015. And she is popular with a sizable chunk of the French working class population. So I think the question with the next election, not knowing anything about it, would be, since Macron can't run next time, who is up against Marine Le Pen? And it looks as if Darmanin is trying to mark his cards fairly early with his sausage, chips and beer gathering, if that leads to something. What the hell happened to French cuisine, by the way? Maybe it's saucisson frites et bière, I don't know. But nevertheless, at the moment, though, he's not had a great track record, it seems to me. And also, his main selling point right now is, I'm not Marine Le Pen. And that probably isn't enough at that stage. I think you need to distinguish yourself in other ways. Maybe he has other talents. He was, as you say, a protege of Sarkozy before deciding that Macron was the wagon he wanted to hitch his star to. But to me, just again as an outsider, he looks like someone who's just trying to make his way up the greasy pole. And I'm not sure he's going to be the compelling candidate for the Macron position when it gets to 2027. So make of that what you will, and I'll probably be saying something completely different in 4 years' time. Who knows?
Yes, thank you, William. And also, it's just worth mentioning maybe that Le Pen, she approved of the Brexit vote for Britain to leave the EU, and she also supported Trump when he won the presidential election. As for sausages, chips, and beers, it sounds a bit Farage, Nigel Farage to me. So yeah, I'd definitely go for your saucisson. But I'll move on to the next item. I mentioned Trump there. Donald Trump's glowering mugshot is on display after Georgia authorities denied his request to be excused from being photographed. Until now, Trump had so far managed to avoid being stood in front of a camera for a mugshot. However, the Fulton County authorities refused to treat him differently from any other indicted person. Asked weeks earlier whether Trump would be required to take a photo, the Fulton County Sheriff, Pat Labatt, a Democrat, said, "It doesn't matter your status, we'll have a mugshot ready for you." The Fulton County Sheriff's Office released the photo Thursday evening after Trump turned himself into the Fulton County Jail, where about half of the 19 defendants in the Georgia election interference case had previously surrendered. The booking process also involves a few other routine steps, including fingerprinting and collecting personal information such as height and weight. The booking form reported that Trump weighed 175 pounds, which raised ironic remarks from commentators. The booking form also recorded his hair colour as blonde or strawberry. Excuse me. However, it did not describe him as an orange male Caucasian. A number of his co-defendants, including Mark Meadows, the former White House Chief of Staff, and Jeffrey Clark, a former Justice Department attorney, had sought to block their arrests, filing emergency requests to extend the deadline to turn themselves in. Their requests were denied on Wednesday. All defendants had until noon, that's 5 p.m. British Summer Time, today to surrender, after which the District Attorney Fannie Willis said she will order warrants for arrest. So, Andrew, William, I've done it again. William, I'm so sorry. William, Trump's mugshot defines modern US politics, that being belligerence and hostility. That's a headline from a comment piece in The Guardian today. Personally, I don't know about you, but I was a wee bit disappointed with the mugshot when it finally came out. I wanted him to look a bit more fragile, a bit more crestfallen, maybe a wee bit crumpled, but no. Or maybe I was hoping for more of a classic, like the time where he was photographed going up the steps to enter Air Force One with a bit of toilet paper sticking to his behind, or even like that time when he was in Turnberry and somebody got a balloon and rubbed it and made it staticky so it lifted his hair. I was kind of hoping something more along those lines. What about you? What did you think of it?
I think it will turn out to be one of the pictures of the year, even if it doesn't have any static electricity in it. It's an absolute study in malevolence, and it's the sort of person you don't want to meet in hell when he's carrying a toasting fork. You'd want reinforced glass between you and him. It just screams, "How dare you do this to me?" And I think The Guardian also saw it as a glimpse of an old man with anger issues. Now, I quite understand that, because actually there are significant resemblances between Trump's mugshot and my own Saltire card mugshot after I'd spent 30 minutes wrestling with a photo machine in Tesco Edinburgh Road, Perth. So, maybe the camera doesn't always lie and maybe it doesn't always tell the truth. But I think you'll find, I mean, I don't know if there is a photograph of the year. I know Time magazine has a man of the year, and that is unlikely to be Trump. But I think the photo will be a classic. And, depending on what happens to him, one can only imagine the revenge he's going to want to carry out on all sorts of people connected with getting him banged up like this. And that could make America a very interesting and dangerous place after 2024 if he's elected. Sarah Palin makes all sorts of apocalyptic predictions about civil war. And, she may not be all that far wrong. We may need to get our relatives. I've got two sisters out in America. We may need to get them to hot-foot it back to Scotland rapidly, I suspect, if that horrific eventuality comes to pass.
I want to see your bus pass now, your Saltire bus pass now, but I'm sure it's not as bad as you say it is.
I'm in a filthy mood, honestly.
The former president's supporters are already embracing the photograph as a badge of honour and defiance. And Andrew Neil's, he said that he thought it looks like it was on the cover of GQ magazine. So I don't know. What do you? And Trump he has already got merchandise, or merch as it's called nowadays. The photographs appeared on T-shirts and mugs that are on sale via his website, I think.
Every negative is a positive for Trump. You might think of that some sort of, oh, that's a good thing that every negative is a positive. But actually, it just means that Trump world is totally topsy-turvy from anything you or I would recognize as reality. So the bad things always turn out good for Trump. That can't go on forever, or can it? We shall see.
I think you should copyright Trump World before Trump uses it and actually produces some kind of theme park. You should stop him being able to do that. So I'll move on to our next item. A new report has revealed that Eritrean and Ethiopian soldiers continue a widespread and systematic campaign of rape in Tigray, despite the peace agreement signed in November last year. In the first report to document sexual violence, using hundreds of medical records from the start of the conflict in November 2020 through to June 2023, healthcare professionals recount cases of gang rape, sexual slavery and murder, including the killing of children. The report by Physicians for Human Rights, PHR, and the Organisation for Justice and Accountability in the Horn of Africa reviewed 304 medical records of conflict-related sexual violence from health facilities across Tigray. 128 showed rape occurring after the agreement to halt all hostilities after 2 years of civil war. Lindsay Green, one of the report's authors and a PHR senior programme officer, said the medical records painted a picture of horrifying experiences. The sexual violence we have documented is brutal and used as a way to intimidate and terrorise communities, she said. Survivors of sexual violence in the report ranged in age from 8 to 69. 3/4 of cases were of gang rapes. 10 accounts were of people who had been held captive and raped by multiple perpetrators. Several patients also described the murder of family members, including children, before, during or after their attack. In almost all cases, 96% that is, perpetrators belonged to the military and paramilitary groups. In many cases, women could only access healthcare months after the violence occurred and had developed serious complications resulting from the attacks. The report listed post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, incontinence, uterine bleeding and chronic pelvic pain. In multiple cases, the rape resulted in pregnancy or in the women contracting HIV. The report's findings, which represent only a small portion of all cases of sexual violence in Tigray, corroborate other reports by the UN, human rights organisations and journalists who have documented abuse since the war began. The brutal 2-year conflict started in November 2020 when the government of Ethiopia began military operations in Tigray against the region's ruling party, the Tigray People's Liberation Front. The war is estimated to have killed 600,000 people, making it one of the world's deadliest recent conflicts. So, William, again, here we've got two white men of a certain age discussing something. It's times like this where I wish we had a female on the panel with us. But why isn't this item in more news? I mean, I've been listening to the radio all day while I've been at work, and I've heard lots of news bulletins, and not one of them have mentioned anything to do with this. So, I don't know, William. What do you have to say? I'm flabbergasted.
Well, all I can say is I'm flabbergasted, but it's simply horrific, and there's very little you can add to that. Why is it not higher up the news? I've got to tell you that the news organisations typically, and society in general, probably prompted by the news organisations, doesn't care. It should care, because once again, these are human beings just like you and me. They happen to have been born in a place where there was a war. That could have happened to you and me had our history and where we were born been different. And yeah, it was a messy end to the war. Eritrea initially didn't want to sign it, the deal, and then signed it a few days later, but they continue to operate parts of Tigray, large parts of Tigray, and yeah, the paramilitaries are still in charge. War ending isn't just about an agreement, but what happens next. And the world didn't care enough, I think, to enforce what happens next in Tigray. And so you've got a dysfunctional society. You've got just horrific misbehavior by the paramilitaries and no way of stopping it. They've still got the guns. They've still got the means of violence. And reports can come from the UN as much as you like, but the West just doesn't care enough to do something about this. And that is shocking and scandalous. And it does make me despair in my dark moments about the state of the world.
Thank you, William. And I was struck by the fact that this report is compiled from medical records, so it's not just hearsay. It's not a journalist going out there and just asking people and taking their own word for it. This is actually something that's documented in people's own personal medical records, which I think is astounding. But I'll move on to the next item. The Leavenmouth rail link reached a significant milestone today as Transport Minister Fiona Hislop installed the final clip in the new track. The project includes 2 brand new stations and 19 kilometres of track laid over several phases since March 2022, connecting Leven to Thornton Junction on the East Coast Main Line with passenger trains for the first time in more than 5 decades. The £116 million project, funded by the Scottish Government and scheduled for completion on time in 2024, will also see preparatory work to enable the electrification as part of wider ambitions to decarbonise Scotland's railway. Ms Hislop said, "It is fantastic to be here today to meet the site team and mark the completion of track laying on the project. It demonstrates what can be delivered through the excellent teamwork and determination that has made this possible. With work progressing on both Leven and Cameron Bridge stations, it is great to see a real and growing sense of excitement and anticipation building around the project, particularly in the surrounding communities, regarding the social and economic benefits that the new line will bring. I would like to thank the team on the ground who worked through all weathers to complete the track and continue to work hard to bring this line back to life. On completion, the line will enable low-carbon transport options and make a real contribution to the government's net zero transport ambitions." So, William, this is good news, and do you think is it evidence? So this is after the beaching cuts in the 1950s, and I remember talking to an expert on railways. He said that the beaching cuts were needed, but he went too far. And just looking at online today, apparently it's 60 years since the beaching cuts. Hundreds of stations and 650 miles of railway line were closed in Scotland alone. And most people seem to agree that the very worst cut was indeed the line from Edinburgh Waverley to Carlisle, which the Scottish Government reinstated around about 2012, I think, which goes via Abbotsford, which I would recommend anybody who hasn't been to Abbotsford, you should definitely go there. I suppose what I'm trying to get at is when the Scottish Government replaced the Waverley line, they were a bit timid and they only did a single track version when they could have taken the opportunity to make it double track. Do you think this is a sign that actually they are getting a bit more adventurous and when it comes to reversing beaching cuts?
Well, they have to be a little bit selective about how they reverse them because I think probably Beeching did go too far. I was too young to notice what was going on at the time, so I can't remember what the debate was. Um, this is a relatively modest improvement, but an improvement it is for the people that lived there. 19 kilometres of track, 2 new stations, and yeah, double tracking it, that is a good idea, but probably because it's part of the whole sort of Thornton, Glenrothes, etc., loop, it would need to be double tracked to make any sense. Whereas the Tweeddale line you spoke of is just going, if you like, back and forth. Although I do think that they might have thought about one day that would be extended to Carlisle ultimately and would require a wee bit more, but that's another story. The other good news side is that this is, as far as I can tell, on budget, but certainly on time. And we hear a lot on the media about the transport projects that are not on time and how they're constantly getting delayed. I'm sure you know what I'm referring to there. But here is another case, just like in its day, the Queensferry Crossing, which is an infrastructure project, done on time. It's not always bad in public procurement in Scotland. It often is in the UK and certainly sometimes is in Scotland, but we should applaud the good ones. And it looks as if this is on track to be one of the good ones.
Thank you, William. And it is worth mentioning, uh, mentioned in the report about the benefit to communities. Again, just those beaching cuts. I mean, that saw towns like Galashiels with populations of about 16,000 left without any rail links. And so this is, it is going to help, isn't it? And help communities in
Yeah.
terms of economy and the like.
It gets us back to joined up thinking. And I mean, one of the things about the beaching cuts is that, yeah, it had unintended consequences, or they had unintended consequences. And those are the sort of things we want to unravel and unpick and make better again. And so this is a good example. And I wouldn't underestimate the benefits to the community of that.
Thank you. So, recommendations to improve audiology services have been made to the Scottish Government, health boards and third sector partners. An independent review of audiology services in Scotland set out 55 recommendations for improving governance and structure, education and leadership. Professor Jacqueline Taylor, MBE, conducted the review for ministers following failures identified in audiology treatment for children. Public Health Minister Jenny Minto said, "I would like to thank Professor Taylor and her team. This thorough report sets out clear options for improving audiology care across the country. We must recognise that many families were badly let down by these services in the past, and this report's recommendation will help ensure that it is not allowed to happen again." The report is clear in its call for better leadership, structure and governance at all levels. Some of the recommendations are in areas where we are already taking action, such as increased funding for staff training. Professor Taylor went on to say, "The wide-ranging recommendations in this report provide the foundation for improvements which will ensure high-quality, joined-up, patient-centred services. Audiology staff are working incredibly hard, often in challenging circumstances, and during the course of the review process, we have seen many examples of good practice. We have also identified a range of issues which need to be resolved. I am extremely grateful to the patients, parents, audiology staff and stakeholders who helped shape this review. We have listened carefully, and I believe that by working together, we have a real opportunity to develop excellent services across Scotland." William, when I think about audiology, I think about people my age, and hearing aids. And as you get old, people expect that you're going to start to go a bit deaf and you're going to lose acuteness in your hearing. But I think, and audiology, it's never going to rank in terms of funding when it's compared to things like cancer, or maybe even its cousin ophthalmology. People kind of are more worried about losing their sight than they are about losing their hearing. But this report centres, I think, on the importance of audiology for babies and for young children and toddlers and the like. I've got something here that says, folk probably understand, we all need all of our senses to be able to communicate and to lead healthy and fulfilling lives. And children who are deaf can have just as good a life as children with hearing, but they have to be found early to get the support that they need to then go on to lead that fulfilling life. And this audiology report seems to be tackling that kind of gap.
Yeah. They say that blindness is a bad thing, but deafness actually potentially cuts you off from people, and deafness from birth, particularly, or hearing problems anyway. Yeah, it's as important as anything, if not more so, you would think. If you've seen occasionally on social media, as I have, the pictures of young kids fitted with a device so they can hear for the very first time, being struck with a sound and just a look of wonderment on their faces, because this is now connecting them with the world. It's not just a series of silent movie images. They can actually understand that things are communicable in other ways, and there are all sorts of exciting sounds. So very important. What's also important about today is that it's about seeing where the problems were, because there were problems back in January 2022, which is why this independent report is happening, and taking steps to ensure they're tackled. You picked out the thing that should be the target. High quality services, for sure, because it should always be high quality services. Joined up services, because that's particularly important when money is a wee bit short and you have to be careful how you're spending it. And most importantly, patient-centred services. Not an easy thing to deliver with children, because frequently children can't tell you what it is they want. But if you can make a stab at it and you've got the investment in there to ensure that you've got staff with expertise and compassion, I think it's not unreasonable to say that good audiology care, particularly for children, can be life-changing, literally that.
Thank you, William. So that was the last item, and so we're a little bit early, or we've got a few minutes left. Is there anything that you wanted to say this evening but maybe didn't get the time?
Oh, I probably made
No.
lots of notes, but I probably threw them away as well. I thought it was an interesting group of news stories. There's a lot more to come with Donald Trump, and that is a particular thing. I mean, the mugshot is one thing, but the state of America to come. I do not see how the 2024 presidential election happens without major ructions. So that is one I genuinely am quite worried about with relatives in the States. One of my sisters is coming back, she thinks anyway, soon. She'll be staying in Scotland for a week looking round, would you believe, Pitt and Weems. So who knows? But the others, I've got a niece who may be coming across to St Andrews to study. She may be staying here, I suspect, because they are not comfortable with the idea of Trump getting back in. And that really does, despite everything, still, I cannot understand why this is. He still is a strong candidate to be president despite all of this legal stuff. Where else in the world would that happen? I really cannot get my head around it. And it makes me wonder, what is the value of the much vaunted and much changed over the years US Constitution?
Yeah, I hope your folks have a great time when they come back, and yeah, I hope they do stay. But it's also worth having a wee look at the other 18 mugshots. I don't think there is 18 complete mugshots there yet, but quite a few of them are actually smiling. They look as if they're enjoying the process, which is quite something. So
Yeah. You're never supposed to smile. You're not supposed to smile for passport photographs, and you certainly aren't supposed to smile when you've been necked. These guys aren't good at this, are they?
yeah, I can see somebody making a set of cards, playing cards or something with them on, but I don't know. Well, thank you again, William, for your insight and for your time.
Well, thank you for having me again. It's been a pleasure once again.
No, likewise, reciprocated. So that's it for this evening. But before I go, can I please remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. You know that our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 per month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Right now we have a pressing need to raise £30,000 to pay our bills and to ensure that we are able to continue making programmes. Thanks to the generosity of our supporters, we are now over the 15,000 halfway mark, which has given us a bit more time to reach our £30,000 target, but we still really need to raise the remaining £15,000 as soon as possible. So, good night and thank you for watching.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.